Good morning again to everyone. I'm really happy to be here together. And today I want to talk about kindness and clarity. I think we'll start out with meditation. So if you find a comfortable position for sitting or lying down, however whatever your body needs at this time, please feel free to do that. So you can start by checking in with your body and just noticing how it feels. Today I want to talk about kindness. And kindness is one of the important qualities, I think, when we meditate. It's also very common that meditators take the approach of being stern with the body, stern with the posture, requiring that we sit and don't move, and if there's pain, to sit through the pain. And some people find this beneficial, but it isn't what we see the Buddha recommending in the suttas. He does encourage us to be diligent and make an effort, but the effort seems to be described as paying attention to our mental states and being diligent about stepping away from the unwholesome mental states and encouraging the wholesome ones. So when we first sit down to meditate, we can take a kind approach to the body and also the mind. Noticing where there's any tightness or discomfort, and just seeing if there's a little change in posture that can help relieve that discomfort. And of course, oftentimes we have pain and discomfort and we can't really do anything about it except to breathe, relax, accept it, and notice when the pain isn't there, because continuous pain is not really the way pain works. Pain has its breaks. It is impermanent. It's not there, or it's not there in the same strength all the time. So when we notice the spaces in between periods of pain, then we have much more of a sense of relief. And many people have reported this, that even though their actual pain level hasn't changed, their experience of pain changes because of their attention on the times when the pain is softer or non-existent. So making the body as comfortable as possible for this body and the state it's in now in this time. Taking a few deep breaths, really allowing ourselves to relax, to let any tension just flow out of the body. If you notice an area in the body that's holding tension, you can feel the contraction of the muscles, you feel tight. And it doesn't release just by breathing and wishing it to release. Then one way to work with that is to tighten those muscles even more. Sometimes when we tighten up strongly and then let go, the muscles can relax. We do want to try to have our spine be straight, but not rigid, not tense, just opening the channels of energy so they can flow easily. So the energy can flow easily through the body. And sometimes I just find myself smiling as the body relaxes, having a kind attitude. And we can also have that kindness towards the mind, whatever state the mind is in. With mindfulness and clarity, we can observe the state of the mind and breathe. And you can even think of the mind taking a breath, just allowing some space, some relief, letting the mind relax. And this kindness that we are showing to the body and the mind, we can also start to use as a basis for metta and the development of metta in the mind. Or maybe just the simple kindness that you feel towards others and towards yourself seems different from your concept of metta. But I think of it as a continuum. And we all know how it feels to be kind. And we know how it feels when others are kind to us. And even though metta is a divine abiding, it's still based on that same kind of kindness. And depending on how your mind works, how visual you are, or how maybe propriosensitive you are, you might experience something like kindness in a different way through different channels, if you will. Maybe for you, kindness has a color. And when you imagine that color, the heart feels more kind. Or maybe there's a feeling in the body that you can easily associate with or identify with kindness. Or maybe kindness arises because of thinking about a time when you were kind to someone or they were kind to you. However that sense arises, then we can begin inviting that to expand. Expand in the mind. We may even have the sense of it expanding in the body, in the whole space around us. And if we stick with it, if we stay present with this feeling or notion of kindness, and we encourage it to expand and grow, eventually it can really reach out to every corner of the world and to all living beings. And we can use this mental state of kindness as a basis for immersion, for a collectedness and stability of mind in a beautifully happy, contented frame or field of awareness. And in this state, it's easy for joy to arise. Maybe it's quite soft and gentle, but it's joy nonetheless. Happiness, tranquility, peace. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to just say a little bit about kindness and clarity, because I think it's very important that they go together. And this is somewhat based on an observation, particularly of people as they develop in their practice. I was living at Chithurst Monastery, and I think it was 2009, and Ajahn Sucitto was the abbot, and it was his 60th birthday. And he gave some reflections on how it felt to be 60. And he said that for him, there was so much kindness. Like that was really what was maturing and developing in his mind, in his heart. And you could really see it. And knowing some of the monks for a very long time, maybe 20 years or more, it's something that one can really witness. This kind of development of practice and this development of kindness. It's so beautiful to see. And I see it in lay people, of course, too. And it's a beautiful thing to experience, that starts to become much more of a basis for one's mind and approach to life. And it's also very important that wisdom is developing as well, because we need to have clarity when we are in whatever situation we're in order to really respond in a way that's appropriate. I don't know if I like the word appropriate, but in a way that's actually kind. And because it's not just about being kind to everyone all the time, it's also about being kind in a way that actually is supportive, which sometimes can not seem kind to everyone in their perception. It's also about being kind to ourselves as well as to others. So the more the practice develops, the more we don't really feel so much difference between oneself and another person. So it's definitely an ongoing change. And I don't know if any of you have challenges. I mean, sometimes people talk to us about challenges that they have when they start doing metta meditation, or they're in a group and there's a metta meditation, guided meditation, and they really don't know how to bring up the kind of the metta. And it brings me to reflect on what metta really is. And there are a few different ways of translating it. You know, sometimes people translate metta as friendliness or goodwill. Ajahn Sujato's been translating it just as love. And I've said a few times, I really like a lot of his choices for translation, but I'm having a little trouble with that one because I feel like we use the word love in so many different ways, and it can bring up, you know, thoughts that are not at all about metta. You know, it can be more about romantic love or other forms of love that may well have quite a fair bit of attachment or expectation in them. And metta is not like that. And so it's really much more of an unconditional love. And I really appreciated a talk by Bhante Gunaratana that he gave at Abhayagiri once many years ago about metta. I think that was where I heard it. Anyway, he talked about how we can see metta most vividly in normal human life, in the love that a mother has for her child. But the experience of metta and this kind of seeing it develop in people, seeing how when they're really developing kindness, that's the metta. And even a mother's love for her child, I remember Bhante Gunaratana saying, even before the child is born, hasn't seen a child at all. She loves this child already most of the time. This is the case. And so therefore it's unconditional. But how many mothers really don't have kind of expectations or requirements from their children? I mean, this is just, it's still not quite the same as a universal, fully accepting pervasion of kindness. And so I would encourage kind of a reflection on what metta really is, and when it occurs in one's experience and when it's not there. So when you see the different references to metta in the suttas, different descriptions. And for one thing, often the Buddha would talk about how metta is what's effective against the state of ill will, whether that's the hindrance ill will that's kind of holding us back from our meditation, or it's a state of mind of anger or aggression towards other living beings, human and otherwise. That metta will relieve us from all of that. That there's no way that we can have ill will in the mind when the mind is filled with metta. And so to me it seems more like a very deep, pervasive kindness. It's loving kindness. It's stronger than love in some ways, if you can imagine. And it feels to me like something more than friendliness. Yeah, friendliness is in there, but it's really that accepting and pervasive, that it really fills the heart. And I feel like we heard that earlier in Sarah's story. Even the Buddha would talk, in the suttas he talks about, even if you're in danger, the physical danger, you have this pervasive kindness for the person who's threatening you. In the simile of the saw, we all know about the graphic image of bandits coming along with a two-handled saw and sawing off your arms and legs. But before that in the sutta, it's really very good. He's talking to a monk who's angry with his brother monks. And he's angry because they're saying negative things about the bhikkhunis, and he really has friendship and appreciation of the bhikkhunis. And you can easily imagine this happening in any group of people. And it doesn't even have to be men and women. It can be any discrimination we choose. You can imagine, people saying negative things about each other, You can imagine someone who has a fondness or a sensitivity towards that group, or an understanding or an experience that helps them understand or appreciate and not want to hear or want people to be negative or accusing or critical. And then the Buddha is talking to this monk, and he's telling him basically to let go of his attachments. And even if people are saying unkind things or doing unkind things, he said, even if they hit you or they cut you with a knife or whatever, you still have a mind full of loving kindness. You still have a mind of metta. Why is that? When people are being so unskillful, it's because our mental state produces everything. You know how the Buddha said the mind is chief, everything comes from the mind? So we don't want to have a mind of ill will, producing more ill will in the world. I mean, we can be concerned about what comes back to us because of that karma, because of that action. But even that is, it's only part of it. Metta is really demonstrated in the suttas as a protection. It's a protection of our consciousness, of our future. Metta is even said to be protection against fire. Against attack. And it's about the safety of the mind. And if, of course, and it's also then about safety of everyone involved. So some of these, first and foremost, recognizing what the experience is of having this kind of mental state. Sorry. The experience of having this, I'm going to pass the electronics to someone who can handle it. Having this kind of experience of metta in the mind, what that feels like, and then what are the causes and conditions that pulls us out of that experience, and what are the causes and conditions that create that experience. And sometimes it's fear that pulls us out of it. Sometimes it can be righteous indignation, of feeling like we shouldn't be treated a certain way, or that people shouldn't act a certain way. And of course that could be well true. And this is where clarity comes in. So being clear about what's wholesome and unwholesome, being clear about what's safe and what's not safe. So if the person, on the street is yelling at us, and we have our heart full of kindness, doesn't necessarily mean you invite them home to stay. That may not be safe. We have to be clear about what's kind for us, for everyone involved. What's the best way to help? Is there anything we can do? One of the, just think about the moments when, or I think about the moments when I'm not in a mind full of kindness. And even if I say things that are the same, I would say the same thing, it has a different tone. I was just noticing. So there was a fire near here this week, a few days ago. And our local little, was it like Yahoo group or something? There's a message. There's a fire on Deer Creek Road. That's where we live. Does anybody have any information? We could hear the helicopters and aircraft coming through. So we just immediately grabbed our stuff that's ready to go, threw it in the car, headed out, and we were meeting fire trucks and equipment coming up the road. And it turned out it wasn't right on Deer Creek Road. It was on one of the roads that goes off of Deer Creek Road, a little bit up the mountain. And of course, the whole time there's a lot of gratitude for the fire department. 3 fire departments were out here. And 7 engines, I think, and all kinds of equipment. They had a bulldozer ready. They were just totally ready. They contained it to 1 acre. They're so on it. Well, it's huge gratitude for Cal Fire and Boulder Creek Fire Volunteer Fire Department and the county fire department, and they're all pitching in. And I read a message from Cal Fire this morning that there's a scam going on now with these phone calls. Do you ever get these phone calls to make donations to the police or the fire fighters? And it's basically a scam. It's a super PAC. You can't tell who's behind it, but the money, if you can read about it, these are common scams. The money doesn't really go, very, very small fraction goes to our firefighters or police support, and the rest is lining the pockets of the people who have organized this scam. So sometimes when they call, I answer, and you get an automated voice, and then if you keep probing, so they'll put a real person on the line. And if I'm really in a good space, I can say, do you realize what you're doing? And this isn't good for you. If I'm not in as good a space, that doesn't come out quite so sweet. So this is practice. I need to understand, like, what's really going on in my mind, And we can do this with anything. I mean, this is any interaction. Where am I coming from? And what are the factors? Is it fear? Is it disgust that pulls me out of or doesn't allow for me to come to it with kindness? And the clarity, like I said, we really want to make sure that the wisdom is there. That's the clarity. So what is appropriate? I realize that, maybe anytime there are many of these scams, right? So it's like whether they're trying to tell you that the IRS is coming after you, or they need your social security number, or there's some kind of like something, right? Whatever it is, to try to explain that they should really get a different job. Might not do any good, but you never know. You never know. And, looking at all the different situations we have in our life and seeing that our conditioning causes us to have the reactions we have. We don't even have to be, and it's important, I certainly have to remind myself to be kind to myself and not blame myself for the patterns that I have, because that's all this conditioned behavior. And to guide my own mind with kindness instead of, severe reprimands. or self-recrimination, it's like, oh, yeah, I know how that got formed, or maybe I don't even know how it got formed. Maybe I came into this life with it. But to realize that it's okay and it can be changed. Or even if we feel like what we've done in the past is not okay, still acknowledging it and changing it, that's the way through it. That's the way to let it go. I think the other main example in my own experience with this idea of, can I come to this with kindness and clarity? And if I'm not, why not? Is when I get into what is very fondly referred to here as work mode. Oh, you can hear the giggling here. When I get into work mode, I'm not necessarily the kind Dhamma mama, which is another Attila the Nun. Yes. So, there's a certain, like, it's got to be done right, and it's got to be done now, and it's got to and of course, neither of those are true. It can be done okay enough, and if it's not okay enough, it can be fixed. And where's all that lovely patience gone? And so it's a practice, and it's not a practice that only comes from directly approaching those times when we're not coming from kindness, or directly approaching practice of metta, but it also comes from the development of the whole path. So it's every aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path that contributes to our ability to have this kind of bedrock mental security and support of kindness. And sometimes you find yourself responding in a way you never imagined you would. And it hasn't come because of any particular emphasis on metta, but the metta is there. The kindness and compassion arise. So I think that's the extent of my comments this morning, and I'm really interested in hearing from all of you about your experience. Yes, Carrie?
I just had a question. So those monks and nuns that you've known that really have a much more enlightened state, let's just call it for simplicity, do they also become like Attila the Nun and Attila the Monk? I mean, do they also
I've seen it.
come off that?
I've definitely seen it, and that's what gets less and less over time. I think it just, that gets less and less, and the kindness and patience get more and more. But there's also, monks like Ajahn Mahabua, who was always like, Ajahn Suchat was his student, and I heard him not that long ago say that he was afraid of Ajahn Mahabua, and a lot of people were known to be so fierce. But then, once Ajahn Pasano told me that he was visiting Ajahn Mahabua's monastery, and Ajahn Mahabua's, scolding somebody, and Ajahn Pasano said that he himself had just been on a meditation retreat, and his mind was very, very clear and open, and what he saw in Ajahn Mahabua was all this metta. So sometimes what's there is not always what's apparent to us. And it's interesting to kind of try to see our way through that, what's really behind it. And sometimes people can be saying the softest, sweetest things, and there's not metta there. There is something else. And so this is also about clarity and wisdom, and really kind of having a sense of what's authentic, and whether our interpretations of things are actually accurate. Thank you, Carrie. Yes, Linda?
About causes and conditions that can move us away from metta. And I have certainly observed that in myself, and taken in the case of Sarah's story, my immediate response would be fear. And I would probably just get myself out of there. And that would be how I would deal with it. And I've had, situations like that where in retrospect I saw that I was being reacting through fear. But I don't really know what to do about that.
So I have my own sense of it. I recently had, it wasn't the same situation because no one was yelling at me, but someone nearby yelling a bunch, and I needed to walk through that area. I didn't need to. I could have changed my mind, and I decided to just keep going. And it was okay, but I think there's what's valuable here, I think, is really, like I said, working with the mental states. So I don't think there's anything wrong with avoiding the situation, because there's probably not much you can do to be supportive. This would, at least for me, being the person I am right now at the age that I am, and the understanding that I have of the need for someone to want my help and for it to actually be help, often, usually anyway, so the action of removing yourself from the situation, I don't think is a problem at all. That seems to be, it can come from that clarity of what is the best, most beneficial thing to do here. But then working with the mind, when the fear is there, noticing as quickly as we can, recognizing with our mindfulness that this is fear-driven. And then how can I work with that fear? And kindness to ourselves, to our own body and mind first, and noticing, there's nothing, you haven't done anything wrong, body and mind, for this fear to arise. But let's see what we're afraid of. What am I trying to protect? At higher, as we develop more higher levels of wisdom, then we become less and less concerned about the body and protecting it. And we want to protect the mind. So we protect the mind with regard to fear. Because the Buddha said, don't take action based on greed, hatred, delusion, or fear. So it's a really rich exploration and practice to work with fear. Because we all have it. It's part of our natural organism makeup. And it's really, really recognizing that we are still identifying with these khandhas and trying to protect them. And it's through our practice, meditation, and all of the other aspects of practice that we start to recognize, wait a minute, there's no substance here. This really isn't me or mine. And yet, the Buddha was clear on a conventional level, you don't put the body in harm's way. You need that thing for practice. And, it's foolish to put ourselves into dangerous situations for no good reason. So this is the clarity part. And then, working with the mind, like I said, as soon as we can catch it, and then, okay, what's behind this fear? And how can I see that with wisdom? And how can I bring the mind into that state of spaciousness and caring? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Linda. Holly?
Good morning, Ayya.
Good morning.
This generation of metta, I was sitting thinking about it or doing it in meditation and had a question. So how does one generate kindness like out of thin air or without something external to give it, or perhaps even without giving it to myself, which is kind of like an aspect of selfing? And maybe it's like metta flows, where is it generated from? How does loving kindness flow through us? Is there a field of metta to tap into? Your comments, please.
Yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of worthy distinctions here, things worth just making a distinction around. One is that metta towards ourself is not a kind of selfing. It actually is the opposite way. That the less identified we are with the khandhas as self, the more open and spacious our metta is for this collection of khandhas, this process that is identified as me. So it's really this is like boosting the wisdom aspect of it, so that we see that the kindness goes in every direction all around, to myself and to others. And this is in the formula, right? The formula that the Buddha gives, I will abide pervading 1/4 with a mind of loving kindness, etc., to all as to myself. And that's where we can really are clear about the conventional self and the reality of not self. And so just to make that distinction. And it does sound like it's getting generated from nothing, but it isn't really. But it's also not that I was going to say this idea of a field of metta. There's definitely a field of merit created by all of our goodness and our virtue. But I think, like, the way I started with the guided meditation is like, we all know how it is to be kind. And we all know how it is, what it feels like when someone's kind to us. And I think this is a good place to start. That feeling of kindness in the heart then can be emphasized and developed. And I think really it is the wisdom that we develop about what the true nature of me and you is. What is that true nature? We're not discrete, separate beings. There's processes that are occurring. And there is the reality of the Dhamma that doesn't change. There is the reality of the path that doesn't change. There is the reality of Nibbana that is here and now, accessible through our opening up to see it. And so there is this metta here and now also, and the other Brahma Viharas, the other states. And so we can think of it as accessing that, or we can think of it as letting that blossom in ourselves. And I think that, it is hard sometimes for people. I think this is why in the commentaries they developed this kind of metta meditation where you think of a living being that's easy to give metta to. And then you develop it from there to our close relatives. And I think they start with the self, which probably comes out of a culture where we're not so self-hating like we are in this culture here in the West. We've got a lot of self-hatred. So we have a hard time with that often, having that metta for ourselves. But the point being, finding our own way to soften the heart. So, and what is it that softens your heart? And then letting the kindness come through. What about from the devas? Yeah, devas are living beings. And they have an influence sometimes on our life with kindness. That's also possible. In fact, I think it's possible to use those 6 reflections of, reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, your own virtue, your own generosity, and the devas, the qualities of the devas. I think it's also a gateway to start feeling the metta flowing in oneself. Just see what it is. What are the thoughts? What are the images? What are the experiences that bring that kindness up into your heart, into your mind? And this isn't just Buddhist. I mean, there are kind people all over the world in every different religion. Kindness is there. Maybe saying kind people isn't quite right. So there's another talk that I hope to give sometime, I think for Anukampa in a couple weeks, on labels. So labels are interesting, supportive and limiting. And, so saying it's a kind person. Are you a kind person? I mean, you're kind sometimes. Are you kind all the time? I hope more and more and more and more. And I think you are, more and more. I don't know, does that help, Holly?
Yes, thank you. It was a mix of like that field of metta or some form of the Brahma Viharas, trusting their presence, and also just kind of, I don't know, today just kind of wanting some kind of slight external agency to help me out. So the day
Yeah.
was kind of, it was maybe time to beseech them to shine a little light.
Yeah, and all your Kalyanamita in deva form or human form, even animal form. Our dogs are incredibly kind sometimes.
My cat wanted out. That was probably my problem.
Cats, yeah, sometimes, yeah, maybe not. Thank you, Holly. Danny?
I'm struck by the thought of what happens that pulls me out of metta. And the other day I was at the post office and it was crowded and it was just, and I finally got up there and the woman at the cash register apologized and she was stressed and I felt this just kindness in me of just, it's okay, like there was some tension before, but I just immediately dropped into, oh, this is a real person. And I felt this connection and it wasn't hard to do. It just felt like the natural thing to do. But then after we sort of were talked for a minute or so, there was a guy who was like third in line or something, kind of talking over people, just making everybody uncomfortable. And I didn't realize until now, as we're talking about this, how much I felt like I just wanted that guy to shut up and he's he act right, follow the rules. I am like And you know, everything was fine. I mean, there's nothing I could do. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. And yet I'm struck by when I left the post office. I wanted someone to gossip with. That's what I wanted. I wanted, so now I'm doing it now to get you on my side about how good I am. And and I guess I want to go to like, what was wrong with me in that I walked out of there not realizing that I was being unkind in my head to this guy. And so then I immediately am struck by how right now of the self-judgment, of the unkindness to myself, rather than saying like, oh, I'm just practicing, I'm just learning. It's like I want to be, I want to go to what's wrong with me, and of course there's nothing wrong with me, and that's why that's why I'm here, to be reminded, because I can't remind myself sometimes, but Attila the nun can.
Oh, she'll try to be the Dhamma Mama when she reminds. That's not a name I gave myself, by the way. We have a neighbor that says you cannot give yourself your own nickname, which is true. Yeah, thank you, Denny. That's so clear. It's so clear those phases the mind goes through, and it's becoming so clear, I think, to me, how important it is to protect the mind, to just kindly encourage it, to really noticing and releasing unwholesome mental states. And so thank you for that example. It's
You're welcome. Thank you.
beautiful. Yeah. Karen?
Hi. I was listening to a teaching a while ago that kind of equated metta to just non-hatred, which I thought, was kind of interesting. It made me think a lot about that. And because I've been noticing in my meditation that my ill will, it arises in me, and then I'm looking for things to be pissed off about. So I can imagine, as far as not having that and thinking, wow, that would be an amazing way to live my life without having any ill will towards somebody. I'm just wondering what you thought about that statement. Like this, it was a monk, I believe, but I can't remember who it was. And he just sort of said he didn't like sort of the teaching, some of the interpretations of metta. He preferred just thinking of it as non-hatred. I found the teaching helped me a lot, but I was just wondering what you thought about that.
There is certainly this idea of, so I do appreciate the Buddha, the teachings and the way the Pali language handles these things, because you have ill will, and then you put an A on the beginning of the word, and it's non-ill will, or fear and non-fear, or anger and non-anger. So Baya is fear, and Abaya, for like Abaya Giri, is fearless mountain, without fear. So without ill will. And I feel like the non-something, the without this is really great, because there are lots of mental states that are without ill will, not just metta. So then, there's even a footnote in the Venerable Nyanamoli's Majjhima Nikaya, and that's the one Bhikkhu Bodhi edited too. So there's a footnote that says you can think of, non-ill will as metta. Or you can think of non-cruelty as compassion. But I don't really think it's a direct match. I mean, yes, it's headed in that direction, but it's also important to understand much more is included in metta than non-ill will. And it's important to know both. It's important to know what it's like to not have ill will. And it's important to know what it's like for your mind to be filled with metta. I mean, you can easily think, okay, non-ill will, the absence of ill will, is different from this incredibly measureless infusion experience of loving kindness. Measureless, boundless, for all beings. Obviously, kind of a different level. So, yeah, it's helpful to have this understanding, these different distinctions. And I think it's helpful to not necessarily equate even the Pali term with an English word, because the Pali is referring to something more vast or more inclusive, or depending on the Pali term. It's good to learn some of the Pali terms. And none of the translate. Like anybody here. I mean, there are several of you who have more than one language skill, extreme skill in more than one language. I'm not one of those people. I'm always like in awe of you, everyone who does have, such felicity with multiple languages. And the little bit of Dutch that I know from my family, there are some words you just can't really translate into English. Is that not the case? Bilingual or multilingual speakers? Yeah. And so this is the way it is with these Pali terms. And the Buddha himself used terms that were used in one way in his day, and then he redefined them. He gave them new definitions that encompassed much more of the what was experienced as practice on the path. So I think it's really good to take the benefit you can take from a talk like that, where they're talking about, metta as non-ill will, but then take it farther. Use what's beneficial from that, and then take it farther and deeper into your understanding of what the Buddha was talking about. And the way to do that is to really get to know the suttas, because the Buddha uses, like all of us, will use certain words in many different ways, or in different ways. They have different, dimensions in their meaning. And so when you see a word like metta talking about, being the quality that vanquishes ill will, but then is also a quality that you can use to go into jhana. You can have deliverance of mind based on metta. This boundless love for self and all beings. So you see it used in different ways, and then you start to get more of a sense of the range of meaning.
Yeah, that's the impression I sort of got from just studying it. It was kind of like a blunt hammer teaching that you get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get there, then you're going to see all those nuances that you're talking about, Yeah.
And especially as we experience it, because, we all know that when we use language to try to describe experience, it definitely falls short. But when we experience it, and then we look at these descriptions and we go, oh, that's what they mean. Yeah.
Thanks. I had just one more thing. I had heard another statement that I thought was really beautiful. Just that, the love the Buddha talks about doesn't need to land on anything, doesn't need something to provoke it. It's just there as a state of your being.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that something feels beautiful to aspire to.
Right, right. It doesn't have to be in that relationship of duality. It's not just, subject object, but actually all around kind of experience that's not tied to any particular goal or, like you said, landing point.